Imagine standing at the edge of a vast desert, where towering stone pillars reach toward the heavens and the whispers of an ancient world seem to echo through the sands. For thousands of years, the priests of ancient Egypt held secrets so profound, so sacred, that they were believed to be the chosen intermediaries between humanity and the divine. These spiritual guardians didn't just perform rituals, they shaped the very fabric of existence, maintaining cosmic balance through practices that blended science, magic, and devotion in ways we are only beginning to understand. Their role was not merely religious, it was foundational to one of history's most enduring and mysterious civilizations. Today, we're going to pull back the veil on these enigmatic figures and explore the 25 sacred practices that defined their lives. From intricate ceremonies under star-filled skies to the meticulous preservation of sacred knowledge, these rituals were designed to harmonize the earthly and the divine. The ancient Egyptian priests served as the vital bridge between people and the gods, performing duties that ranged from healing the sick to interpreting dreams, from conducting grand temple rites to safeguarding esoteric wisdom that could alter reality itself. Their work was considered essential not just for the pharaoh or the elite, but for the stability and prosperity of the entire kingdom. What made these practices so powerful? How did they merge the tangible and the mystical to create a system of belief that has fascinated scholars and seekers for centuries? As we journey together through these 25 sacred traditions, you'll discover how these priests used astronomy, herbalism, meditation, and ritual to tap into forces beyond ordinary perception. You'll see how their legacy continues to influence spiritual thought today and why their methods remain relevant for anyone searching for deeper meaning. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an invitation to step into a world where the boundaries between the human and the holy were fluid, dynamic, and alive with possibility. So let's begin this exploration, uncovering the wisdom of those who walked between worlds. Our journey into the 25 sacred practices begins at the break of dawn with the first and most fundamental ritual of the priestly day, the meticulous process of purification. Before a single prayer could be uttered or any offering made, the ancient Egyptian priest had to undergo a profound transformation, preparing his entire being to become a vessel worthy of divine presence. This was not a casual routine, it was a sacred obligation, a daily reenactment of creation itself, designed to separate the priest from the profane world and align him with the cosmic order of Mat. This transformation began with the body. A priest would start his day by immersing himself in cold, flowing water, a symbolic return to the primordial waters of none from which all life emerged. Following this bath, he would use a special paste made from natron salt, a naturally occurring compound of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate harvested from the desert's dry lake beds. This substance was not merely a primitive soap, it was a powerful agent of both physical and spiritual cleansing, used in the mummification process to preserve the bodies of the dead for eternity. For the living priest, it served a parallel purpose, to dry out and eliminate any impurity, any element of decay or chaos that clung to him from the mortal realm. He would then carefully shave every hair from his body, including his eyebrows and even his eyelashes. This act of shaving was deeply symbolic. Hair was considered unclean, a breeding ground for lice and impurity, and its removal signified the shedding of one's baser, animal nature to achieve a state of absolute ritual purity. Only after this rigorous cleansing could the priest don his ritual garments. He was required to wear garments made exclusively from pure white linen. This was a strict prohibition against wool, as linen was seen as a gift from the gods, a product of the flax plant that was cool, clean, and symbolically pure. Wool coming from animals was associated with the chaotic, impure forces they sought to keep outside the temple's sacred boundaries. Dressed in this spotless white linen, the priest was now a blank slate, a purified being ready to cross the threshold from the mundane into the divine. We can vividly picture this ceremony unfolding within the immense stone complex of the Temple of Karnak as the first rays of the sun god Ra stretched across the horizon. The high priests, having completed their ablutions, would process through the towering pylons and obelisks, moving from the bright, open courtyards into the increasingly darker and more restricted halls. The air would be thick with the scent of incense, myrrh and frankincense burned to please the gods and further purify the atmosphere. Their footsteps would echo on the stone as they approached the innermost sanctum, the Holy of Holies, where the statue of the god Amun-Ra resided. This statue was not just an idol, it was a vessel, a physical home for the divine essence of the god. The morning ritual, known as the opening of the mouth, involved awakening the statue, presenting it with offerings of food, drink, and fine cloth, and dressing it for the day. Through these actions, the priest served the god directly, ensuring its continued presence and favor, which in turn guaranteed the stability and prosperity of all Egypt. This daily communion was the bedrock of their entire civilization, a sacred contract between heaven and earth renewed with every sunrise. And at the heart of this daily communion was the most potent and mystical of all priestly duties, the opening of the mouth ceremony. This was far more than a simple ritual. It was the sacred technology of animation, a complex procedure designed to transform a lifeless statue of stone, metal, or wood into a true vessel, a living receptacle for the spirit of a god. The ancient Egyptians believed that the divine could not interact directly with the mortal world without a physical form, and it was the priest's ultimate responsibility to provide one. Through a precise sequence of chants, gestures, and the application of sacred implements, they performed what can only be described as a metaphysical activation, turning an object of art into a being of power. The ceremony was a precise reenactment of the myth where the god Horus used a magical adze to open the mouth of his deceased father, Osiris, restoring his senses and thus his divine power. The high priest, acting in the role of Horus, would approach the shrouded statue within the darkness of the sanctuary. The air would be thick with the smoke of Kai-Fi incense, believed to please the gods and facilitate a connection to the divine realm. He was accompanied by a lector priest who held a papyrus scroll, meticulously reciting the exact spells and incantations that had been passed down for generations. The spoken word, or heka, was considered a creative force in itself, a vibration that could shape reality. Every syllable had to be perfect, every intonation correct for the magic to work. The tools used were as symbolic as they were functional. The central implement was the pesishkef, a ritual adze often crafted from meteoritic iron, which the Egyptians called bia en pet, or metal from heaven. This celestial origin made it uniquely powerful, a fragment of the divine realm itself. With this adze, the priest would gently touch the statue's mouth, ears, and eyes. This wasn't a physical carving, it was a symbolic opening. Each touch was accompanied by a specific declaration. For the mouth, he might chant, "I open your mouth for you that you may speak with it." For the eyes, "I open your eyes for you that you may see with them." Other instruments followed, a forked blade to open the nostrils so the statue could breathe in the scent of offerings, a rod shaped like a snake to grant movement, and a finger made of sacred ebony wood to anoint the statue with precious oils. This entire process was about granting the statue its senses, its means of interacting with the world. Once awakened, the statue was no longer an inanimate object. It was believed to see the offerings presented to it, smell the incense, hear the prayers of the people, and even speak through oracles. The god was now truly present, inhabiting its earthly home, and the daily offerings of food, drink, and fine linen became a genuine sustenance for the divine essence within. This ritual was the critical linchpin that made everything else possible. Without it, the temple was just a beautiful building, and the god remained distant and inaccessible. Through the opening of the mouth, the priests maintained the vital, living connection between the people of Egypt and the powerful forces that governed their universe, ensuring the continued flow of divine grace and protection. But the divine presence, once awakened, required constant sustenance. This brings us to the third sacred practice, the meticulous and deeply symbolic ritual of offering presentations. 3 times each day, without fail, the purified priests would present a lavish meal to the now animated god in its sanctuary. This was not a mere gesture of respect. It was a crucial act of reciprocity, a divine exchange that nourished the god and, in turn, guaranteed the god's continued favor and protection over the land of Egypt. The offerings were a tangible expression of the covenant between the human and the divine, and their presentation was governed by an elaborate set of rules as precise as any modern recipe. The core of this divine meal was surprisingly familiar, centered on staples that formed the backbone of the ancient Egyptian diet: bread, beer, and meat. But each item carried a profound symbolic weight far beyond its nutritional value. Bread, often shaped into conical forms called peson, represented the very body of the god Osiris and the concept of eternal life. The act of baking was seen as a microcosm of creation itself, with the oven mirroring the womb and the finished loaf symbolizing rebirth. Beer, a thick, nutritious brew made from fermented barley, was not just a beverage. It was associated with the eye of the god Horus, and its intoxicating properties were believed to induce a state of divine ecstasy and joy in the deity. Joints of beef or fowl, typically from ritually slaughtered oxen or geese, symbolized the raw, powerful life force, the sheer energy of existence that the gods required to maintain their cosmic functions. Alongside these sat elegant alabaster vessels filled with cool, clear water, wine, and milk, representing the nourishing primordial waters of Nun. And then there was the incense. While food and drink nourished the god's essence, incense was the medium of communication. As the priest lifted a small pellet of kaifi or myrrh onto a glowing charcoal brazier, the thick, sweet smoke would rise, carrying the prayers and praises of the people directly to the heavens. The Egyptians believed the gods literally lived on the scent of these sacred aromas. The rising smoke also served a practical purpose for the priests. Its behavior was carefully observed for omens. A steady, straight column of smoke signified the god's acceptance and pleasure, while a scattered, wafting cloud could be interpreted as displeasure or distraction, requiring additional prayers or offerings to rectify. The quantities and specific combinations of these offerings were not left to chance. Temple archives, like those found at the Ramesseum, provide astonishingly detailed inventories. We know, for instance, that on an average day, the statue of Amun-Ra at Karnak might receive 34 jugs of beer, 44 loaves of bread, and cuts of meat from several bulls, alongside baskets of dates, figs, and bundles of fresh lettuce. These amounts would swell dramatically during major festivals. The key was to present the finest quality available. The bread was baked from the whitest, most finely ground flour. The beer was the strongest and freshest batch. The meat came from the healthiest, unblemished animals raised on temple grounds specifically for this purpose. The priests were essentially preparing a 5-star banquet for the most important guest imaginable every single day. After a prescribed period where the god was believed to spiritually consume the essence of the food, the physical leftovers were removed. This was not waste. It was considered immensely blessed, having been touched by the divine. This reversion of offerings was then distributed among the temple staff, from the high priests down to the laborers, as a form of sacred sustenance. It was a powerful cycle. The people grew the food, the priests presented it to the god, and the god's blessing then returned to nourish the people, creating a continuous loop of spiritual and physical sustenance that bound the entire community together under the watchful eyes of the gods. Yet the communication with the divine extended far beyond the silent language of smoke and offerings. The very air within the temple walls was shaped and sanctified by the fourth sacred practice, the powerful art of sacred chanting and hymnody. For the ancient Egyptian priest, the human voice was not merely an instrument for song. It was a tool of creation, a resonant force capable of maintaining the fabric of the universe. The recitation of hymns was a precise science, governed by strict rules of tonality, rhythm, and breath, each element meticulously designed to generate specific vibrations that aligned with cosmic frequencies and pleased the ears of the gods. This was not a matter of simple singing. Priests underwent rigorous training to master a specialized vocal technique known as shenu, which translates to encircling or surrounding. This involved a form of circular breathing, where the singer would maintain a continuous, unbroken stream of sound by inhaling rapidly through the nose while simultaneously pushing air out from the cheeks. This technique allowed for the elongated, drone-like tones that were the hallmark of their sacred music. The goal was to produce a rich, resonant hum, a sound that could fill the stone chamber and create a palpable vibration felt in the chest of the singer and the listeners alike. They believed this specific resonance had the power to purify the space, drive away chaotic forces, and literally hold the stars in their courses. The pitch was often low and steady, emulating the primordial hum of creation itself, the sound they believed the god Ptah made to bring the world into existence. The content of these hymns was just as carefully constructed as their delivery. The most famous examples preserved on the walls of tombs and temples are those dedicated to the sun god Ra. A hymn from the tomb of the brothers Suti and Hor, overseers of the temple craftsmen under Amenhotep III, beautifully illustrates this. It begins, "Adoration of Re upon his rising," by the two praise singers of the Lord of the Two Lands, Suti and Hor. The hymn then describes Ra's journey in his solar bark, using repetitive, rhythmic phrases that mimic the steady, powerful beating of a heart or the oars dipping into the celestial waters. "How beautiful is your passing, O Re, who creates the hours. The flagon of gold rises on your beams, for you are glorious and triumphant." The structure is cyclical, mirroring the sun's eternal journey, and the language is rich with metaphors of light, rebirth, and power. Similarly, hymns to Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection, possessed a different but equally potent character. They were often slower, more somber, and deeply rhythmic, reflecting themes of death and renewal. A magnificent Osiris hymn from the great temple at Abydos instructs the singers, "Make music for the Lord of Silence, beat the drum for the weary-hearted." This instruction reveals the percussive element that accompanied many chants, with priests using sistrum's sacred rattles, drums, and clappers to maintain a hypnotic, trance-inducing rhythm. The musical notations for these hymns weren't written on a modern staff. They were indicated by hieroglyphic signs above the text. A bold arm, the aeroglyph for Ka, meaning spirit, might indicate a strong, accented beat. A small glyph of a man with his hand to his ear signaled a passage to be sung softly, almost as a whisper. These visual cues provided a complete guide for performance, ensuring the ritual was recreated with perfect fidelity for centuries. The ultimate purpose of this sacred soundscape was to achieve Heka, divine magic through speech. The priests understood that correctly pronounced words, delivered with the right intention and the correct resonant frequency, could enact real change in the world. A hymn was not a request, it was a participation. By chanting the praises of Ra's sunrise, the priests weren't just asking for the sun to rise. They were actively assisting in its daily rebirth, their voices providing the energy and the framework necessary for the cosmic cycle to continue. In this way, the temple was not a quiet place of solitary meditation, but a vibrant, humming engine of creation, its stones vibrating with the powerful, sustained tones that fed the gods and sustained the universe. But the priest's work extended far beyond the walls of the inner sanctuary, reaching literally for the heavens. High atop the temple's flat roof, under the vast, unpolluted night sky of ancient Egypt, the fifth sacred practice unfolded, the meticulous science of astronomical observation. This was not a detached academic pursuit, it was a vital, sacred duty. The priests believed the sky was a divine clockwork, a cosmic map where the movements of the gods were written in light. By reading this celestial script, they could synchronize human activity with the divine will, predicting the future and maintaining the order of the universe. Equipped with rudimentary yet brilliant tools, these ancient scientists performed feats of observation that still inspire awe. Their most essential instrument was the merkit, a simple piece of notched palm wood that functioned as a precision sighting tool. A priest, known as the horologum or hour watcher, would use a pair of these devices aligned with the North Star to trace the transits of specific stars across a series of predetermined markers. This allowed them to partition the night into 12 equal hours, creating a remarkably accurate star clock. They also used the bay, a notched horizontal bar that measured the shadows cast by the sun to mark the passing of daylight hours. With these simple tools, they built a precise and reliable calendar that governed every aspect of life. Their primary focus was the relentless tracking of the decans, 36 specific star groups or constellations that rose consecutively on the horizon just before dawn throughout the year. Each decan marked a 10-day week in their calendar, and the heliacal rising of a new decan, its first visible reappearance after a period of being too close to the sun, was a moment of immense ritual significance. But no celestial event was more critical than the heliacal rising of Sopdet, whom we know as the star Sirius. After vanishing for 70 days, when Sirius finally peaked above the eastern horizon just before sunrise, it signaled the imminent, life-giving inundation of the Nile River. This event, which coincided with the summer solstice, was the Egyptian New Year, the start of the season of Akhet, or inundation. The priest's ability to predict this event months in advance was their greatest practical power, allowing the entire civilization to prepare for the flood that would fertilize their fields and guarantee another year of plenty. This celestial knowledge was deeply interwoven with their theology. They didn't just see a star, they saw the goddess Isis weeping tears of joy for her husband Osiris, and those tears were the Nile's floodwaters. The constellation Orion was Osiris himself, the god of death and resurrection, traveling through the underworld. The circumpolar stars that never set were the imperishable ones, the blessed dead who had achieved eternal life in the company of the gods. The Milky Way was the heavenly Nile, a celestial reflection of the earthly river. Every planetary movement was a god on a journey. Jupiter was Horus the falcon, Mars was the red god Horus of the horizon, and Venus was the morning and evening star, a manifestation of the god of wisdom, Thoth. By charting these divine journeys, the priests could determine the most auspicious times for religious festivals, coronations, and temple foundation ceremonies, ensuring that every major human endeavor was launched under a favorable and powerful cosmic alignment. Their rooftop vigils were a continuous dialogue with the gods, a sacred science that turned the infinite sky into a manageable, predictable, and deeply holy text. Yet the most personal and intimate form of divine communication occurred not under the open sky, but in the quiet, vulnerable state of sleep. This brings us to the sixth sacred practice, where the priests served as psychoanalysts of the soul, interpreting the mysterious messages sent by the gods through the medium of dreams. For the ancient Egyptians, a dream was never just a random firing of neurons. It was a direct portal to the divine realm, a message that could contain warnings, prophecies, instructions, or diagnoses. And it was the sacred duty of the temple's trained dream interpreters to decipher its hidden code. This was a service available to everyone, from the pharaoh in his palace to the common laborer in his village. We have remarkable evidence of this from the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Among the ostraka and papyri found there, we see records of ordinary people bringing their troubling or vivid dreams to a local scribe or a part-time priest for interpretation. The stakes could be incredibly high. A pharaoh's dream could dictate national policy, such as the famous dream of King Djoser, interpreted by his brilliant vizier Imhotep, which foretold 7 years of famine and 7 years of plenty, leading to the construction of vast granaries. For a commoner, a dream might reveal the cause of an illness, the location of a lost object, or the intentions of a rival. To navigate this symbolic landscape, the priests relied on specialized reference texts known as dream books. These were not books of vague, universal symbols, but rather detailed, systematic manuals that functioned more like medical or legal texts. The most famous surviving example is the Chester Beatty Papyrus, now housed in the British Museum, which dates to the reign of Ramesses II. This papyrus is organized with meticulous clarity. It presents a long list of specific dream scenarios, each followed by a binary evaluation. Good, meaning the D-R-E-M Chinese letter a positive outcome, or bad, meaning it warns of coming evil. The interpretations are fascinatingly literal and deeply rooted in Egyptian culture and wordplay. For instance, the papyrus states that dreaming of drinking warm beer is bad. It means you will suffer injustice. But dreaming of drinking cold beer is good. It means you will live in joy. This makes perfect sense in a context where beer was a staple and warm beer would be stale and unpleasant, while cold beer, drawn fresh from a jar kept in a cool place, was a delight. Another entry says that seeing a large cat in a dream is good, for it means a large harvest is coming. The Egyptian word for large is ar, and the word for cat is mu, but the interpretation hinges on the word for harvest, which is shet. There's no direct pun, but the large cat was likely a symbol of the benevolent, protective goddess Bastet, whose favor would ensure agricultural abundance. The process was a true consultation. A person would describe their dream to the priest, who would then carefully consult his dream book, cross-referencing the elements to find the closest matches. He wasn't just looking up one symbol, he was synthesizing a narrative from a series of decoded images. For example, if a scribe from Deir el-Medina dreamed of seeing his own writing tablet sinking in the river, a bad omen meaning his words would be ignored, but also of catching a fat fish, a very good omen meaning he would receive something of value from an official. The priest would have to weigh these opposing symbols to provide a nuanced prognosis. The ultimate belief was that during sleep, the soul's perception, the Ba could momentarily free itself from the body and travel into other realms, receiving messages from deities or the spirits of the dead. A frightening dream of being chased might be a warning from a protective spirit about a real-world threat. A comforting dream of a deceased relative could be taken as a genuine communication and a sign of their well-being in the afterlife. The priest, with his trained understanding of the symbolic language of the gods and his authoritative text, provided the essential translation service, turning confusing nocturnal visions into actionable guidance for daily life, proving that the gods spoke to humanity not only in grand celestial movements but also in the quiet, personal whispers of the night. This profound understanding of the divine, accessed through dreams and stars, was applied to one of the priest's most vital earthly responsibilities, the art of healing. The ancient Egyptian priest-physician operated within a framework that would seem deeply foreign to us today, one where a broken bone and a broken spirit were treated as interconnected ailments. Their approach was a sophisticated, integrated system that wielded the power of magical incantation with the same confidence as a poultice of honey and willow bark, refusing to see a distinction between the spiritual and the physiological. To them, illness could be caused by a pathogen, a demon, or the disfavor of a god, and the treatment had to address all possible origins. Their vast knowledge was meticulously recorded on medical papyri, which served as both textbooks and sacred texts. The most famous of these, the Ebers Papyrus, is a staggering scroll over 20 meters long, containing some 700 magical formulas and remedies. It begins with a solemn declaration of its divine origin, stating it was found under the feet of the god Anubis in Letopolis, immediately establishing its authority as both scientific and supernatural. The papyrus is systematically organized, with entire sections dedicated to ailments of the stomach, heart, eyes, and skin. But alongside prescriptions for herbal concoctions, it contains elaborate spells to be recited during the preparation and application of medicine. For instance, a treatment for a headache might involve a topical application of crushed acacia leaves, but only after the priest had recited a spell to banish the demon causing the pain. Begone, demon of pain. You who have seized the brow of Osiris, you shall not seize the brow of the patient's name. I am Thoth, the physician of the Eye of Horus. Their herbal knowledge was incredibly advanced and formed the bedrock of their practical medicine. They maintained extensive temple gardens where they cultivated and experimented with a vast pharmacopoeia. They used garlic for its antibiotic and anti-parasitic properties, thyme as an antiseptic, and fenugreek to ease respiratory complaints. They understood the painkilling power of opium derived from poppies and the anti-inflammatory effects of coriander and castor oil. Honey was a staple in their treatments. Its natural antibacterial qualities made it an ideal wound dressing, often mixed with lint to pack injuries and prevent infection. They even used a form of moldy bread applied to wounds, an early intuitive application of penicillin millennia before its formal discovery. Surgical techniques, while primitive, were surprisingly effective. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, the world's oldest known surgical treatise, details 48 cases of injuries, fractures, wounds, and dislocations. It reads with a startlingly modern clinical approach. Each case is presented with a clear triage: an ailment I will treat, an ailment I will contend with, or an ailment not to be treated. The text describes examining a patient by palpation, taking their pulse, and observing symptoms like facial twitching or stiffness in the neck. For a compound fracture of the skull, the text advises against intervention, recognizing a hopeless case. For a dislocated jaw, it provides precise instructions for reduction. You are to put your thumbs upon the ends of the two rami of the mandible inside his mouth, and your two claws, fingers under his chin. You should cause them to fall back so that they rest in their places. The true genius of their system was how these two strands, the empirical and the magical, were woven together in a single treatment. Consider a scenario where a laborer was brought to the temple's house of life after a viper bite. The practical physician-priest would immediately act, making incisions around the puncture marks to suck out the venom and applying a tight tourniquet to slow its spread. He would then prepare a poultice of onions and salt, substances known to draw out fluid and reduce swelling, but simultaneously the lector priest would be summoned. He would recite spells from a magical text, perhaps the Brooklyn Papyrus, which is dedicated entirely to serpent spells. He might invoke the protective power of the goddess Isis, who according to myth used her magic to heal her son Horus from a scorpion sting. O poison, come forth, go out from the patient's name. See, Isis has conjured you and drives you out. The spell itself might be written in ink on the patient's skin surrounding the bite, or the ink could be washed off a papyrus bearing the spell into a liquid for the patient to drink. The entire process was a single, unified therapy. The herbal remedy treated the body, the spell treated the patient's terror and the perceived spiritual cause, and the authority of the priest provided a powerful placebo effect, giving the patient the absolute belief in their own recovery. This holistic method, which modern science is only now beginning to fully appreciate, recognized that healing the person was just as important as curing the disease. Yet the priest's role as a healer reached its ultimate expression not in the preservation of life, but in its sacred continuation beyond death, through the eighth and perhaps most iconic of their sacred practices, the intricate 70-day journey of mummification and funeral rites. When a soul departed, the priests of Anubis took charge, transforming the body from a vessel of decay into an eternal, perfected form, a process that was as much a spiritual reactivation as it was a physical preservation. This was not merely a burial custom, It was a meticulous reenactment of the myth of Osiris, designed to guide the deceased through a perilous cosmic trial and secure their place among the imperishable stars. The process began the moment death was confirmed. The body was rushed to the Pernefer, the House of Beauty, a special workshop attached to the temple precinct. Here, the chief embalmer, wearing a jackal-headed mask to embody the god Anubis himself, would begin with a ritual purification. The body was washed with palm wine and water from the Nile, symbolizing a return to the primordial waters of creation. The most sacred and invasive procedure then followed. Using a ritual blade of Ethiopian stone, a priest known as the paraskist or slitter would make a precise incision in the left flank of the abdomen. As he performed this act, other priests would ritually curse and throw stones at him, forcing him to flee the room immediately after the cut was made. This dramatic reaction underscored the profound taboo of violating the body's integrity. The act was necessary for salvation, but it was also a desecration that required spiritual atonement. Through this incision, the internal organs, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were carefully removed. These were not discarded. They were cleansed, dehydrated with natron salt, and individually placed into 4 hollowed-out containers known as canopic jars. Each jar was topped with a stopper carved in the likeness of one of the 4 sons of Horus, protective deities who safeguarded these vital organs for eternity. The human-headed Imseti guarded the liver, the baboon-headed Hapi protected the lungs, the jackal-headed Duamutef watched over the stomach, and the falcon-headed Kebesenuf shielded the intestines. The heart, believed to be the seat of intelligence, memory, and conscience, was left carefully in place. The brain, whose function was a mystery to them, was deemed unimportant and was liquefied with special hooks and extracted through the nostrils. Now hollowed, the body was packed inside and out with natron salt, a naturally occurring desiccant, and left to dry for 40 days. This was not a quick process. It was a patient, symbolic drying that mirrored the desert's power to halt decay and preserve. After this period, the desiccated form was brought to the Waybit, or pure place. Here, a team of priests began the lengthy restoration. The empty cavity was packed with clean linen, sawdust, natron packets, and aromatic materials like myrrh and cinnamon to restore the body's shape and pleasant scent. The skin was anointed with sacred oils and resins. Cedar oil, juniper oil, and heated pine resin were poured over the body and into the cavity, which hardened into a protective shell, waterproofing and further preserving the tissues. The final act was the meticulous wrapping. Hundreds of yards of fine linen strips were used, each wrap accompanied by specific prayers and the placement of amulets within the layers. A scarab beetle was placed over the heart, a 2-finger amulet by the embalming incision, and the wedged eye of Horus for protection and wholeness. Every fold of linen was a prayer, every amulet a piece of armor for the journey ahead. With the body now a sanctified Tsar or mummy, the focus shifted to the funeral procession and the ultimate test. The mummy, placed in its coffin, was dragged on a sledge to the tomb entrance by a team of oxen, accompanied by professional mourners who wailed and threw dust on their heads in a display of grief. But the most critical participants were the priests. A lector priest recited the spells from the Book of the Dead from a papyrus scroll, providing the deceased with the words of power needed to navigate the underworld. A Sem priest wearing a leopard skin performed the crucial opening of the mouth ceremony at the tomb's entrance. Just as he did for a temple statue, he used a ritual adze to touch the mouth, eyes, ears, and nose of the mummy's coffin, symbolically restoring its senses so the soul could see, hear, speak, and eat in the afterlife. Then came the climax of the entire funeral, the weighing of the heart ceremony, staged dramatically within the tomb's decorated chapel. The priests acted as the divine jury. On one side of a great scale sat the heart of the deceased, placed in a special jar. On the other side sat the feather of Mat, representing truth, justice, and cosmic order. The god Anubis knelt to adjust the scale, while the ibis-headed Thoth stood ready to record the result. If the heart was heavy with the weight of sin and wrongdoing, it would sink, and the monstrous devourer, Ammit part lion, hippo, and crocodile, would lunge forward to consume the heart, condemning the soul to a second permanent death. But if the heart was as light as the feather, proving a life lived in balance and truth, Thoth would declare, "True of voice, his heart is righteous." The king of the afterlife, Osiris, seated on his throne, would then grant the soul eternal life in the field of reeds. This entire drama was not just a hope, it was a ritual the priests performed to magically ensure a positive outcome. By correctly reciting the spells and performing the roles of the gods, they were effectively guaranteeing the deceased's justification before the divine tribunal, sealing their fate as a blessed spirit forever alive in the world to come. But for matters requiring a direct and immediate answer from the gods themselves, the people and the pharaoh turned to the ninth sacred practice, the breathtaking public spectacle of oracle consultations. This was divine democracy in action, a process where the will of a god was made manifest not in the quiet of a dream or the pattern of stars, but in the undeniable physical movement of its statue for all to see. During grand festivals, the priests would bring the god out of its dark sanctuary, placing the heavy, bejeweled divine statue onto a monumental bark shrine supported by long poles. Teams of high priests would then shoulder this sacred weight and process through the thronging, ecstatic crowds, transforming the entire city into an open-air temple. The most famous of these was the Oracle of Ammon at Thebes. As the god's bark was carried through the streets, petitioners from the highest officials to the humblest farmers would line the route, shouting their yes or no questions into the air. "O Ammon, great lord, should we dig a new well in the eastern field? Mighty God, is the vizier Useremon still in your favor?" The true genius of the priests lay in the sophisticated, almost imperceptible mechanisms they used to facilitate a response. The movement of the bark was not a random shake, it was a controlled, amplified communication system. The priests bearing the weight were not merely carriers, they were highly trained sensitives, reading the subtle, unconscious shifts in the collective will and the political climate, then translating that reading into a physical cue. Through years of practice, they developed a way to communicate through nearly undetectable pressures on the poles. A slight forward lean from the lead priest could signal the group to surge ahead, indicating a divine yes. A subtle backward shift in weight could cause the entire bark to recoil or dip, a powerful no. To the thousands of worshippers watching, this was not a group of men deciding. It was the tonnage of a god-led shrine leaping forward or pulling back under its own divine power. The psychological impact was overwhelming. The sight of the colossal, gilded bark suddenly surging toward a petitioner to answer yes was a moment of pure, unmediated divine contact, a validation that could make a person's life or break a politician's career. We have a stunning historical account of this oracle's power from the reign of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. To legitimize her unprecedented rule as a king, she claimed her very right to the throne was a decree from Ammon himself, delivered via his oracle. A royal inscription describes the scene during a festival procession. The god's bark was brought before her father, Thutmose I, and the court. The inscription states that the god miraculously circled the room before stopping directly before Hatshepsut, designating her as the rightful heir. Whether this was a brilliant political manipulation staged by her priestly allies or a genuine moment of collective belief, the result was the same. The oracle's pronouncement was law, and it secured her reign. The applications were vast and practical. At the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina, records show disputes over stolen property or personal arguments were often settled by taking the issue before a portable statue of a deified king or a local god during a procession. The god's movement would identify the guilty party or validate a claim, and its judgment was accepted without question. This system provided a powerful, culturally unquestionable form of conflict resolution that maintained social order. The priests, through their intimate connection to the divine vessel and their deep understanding of human nature, acted as the interpreters of a will that was beyond reproach, channeling the voice of the divine to answer the most pressing questions of state and spirit, proving that the gods were not distant rulers but active participants in the daily life of their people. Yet this direct, physical communication with the divine was just one facet of a much broader project of spiritual education, a project that reached its most spectacular and immersive form in the 10th sacred practice, the grand state-sponsored sacred drama performances. During the great religious festivals, the entire temple complex was transformed into a vast, open-air theater where priests became actors, the courtyards became stages, and the sacred myths were not merely told but physically reenacted with breathtaking spectacle. This was religion as total experience, designed to make the cosmic struggles of the gods viscerally real for every single worshipper, from the illiterate farmer to the educated scribe. The most important of these ritual dramas was undoubtedly the mystery play of the succession, a multi-day performance that reenacted the central myth of Egyptian cosmology, the murder of the god Osiris by his jealous brother Seth, the subsequent grief and magic of his wife Isis, and the triumphant avenging of his son Horus. This was far more than entertainment. It was a foundational ritual that reinforced the pharaoh's divine right to rule as the living incarnation of Horus, while also exploring profound themes of death, resurrection, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. The performance was a massive undertaking, requiring a huge cast of priests, elaborate props, and complex stage machinery. Archaeology gives us a vivid window into these ancient productions. At the Temple of Horus at Edfu, for instance, the walls are covered with detailed reliefs that essentially serve as a director's script. They describe the precise lines of dialogue to be spoken, the specific gestures to be made, and even the costumes to be worn. We know that the priest playing the villainous Seth would have worn a mask or headdress featuring the mysterious Seth animal, a creature with a curved snout and square ears, and would have carried a special scepter symbolizing his chaotic power. The actor embodying Horus would be adorned with a magnificent falcon headdress of gilded wood and lapis lazuli. The most poignant role was that of Isis, whose lamentations for her dead husband were sung in a haunting, melodic style that moved audiences to tears. Her costume likely included the throne hieroglyph on her head, identifying her as the royal mother, and she may have used a magical rattle called a sistrum to accompany her songs of mourning. The stagecraft involved was astonishingly sophisticated for its time. The performance would move through different areas of the temple, each location symbolizing a different part of the mythic world. The lush temple garden might represent the fertile Nile delta where Osiris was originally tricked and trapped by Seth. The sacred lake could become the watery abyss where Isis searched for the pieces of her husband's dismembered body. The most dramatic effects were reserved for the climax, using a system of pulleys and counterweights hidden within the temple's massive stone pillars. The priests could create the illusion of divine ascension. A priest representing the resurrected Osiris might be hoisted high above the crowd, seemingly ascending into the heavens, while hidden braziers released clouds of incense to shroud the mechanism in mystery. At the precise moment of Horus's victory over Seth, priests might release live falcons into the air above the temple, a stunning visual metaphor for the god's triumphant presence. The emotional impact on the audience was profound. For the average Egyptian who was not permitted beyond the temple's public courtyards, this drama was their most direct encounter with the gods. They weren't passive spectators, they were encouraged to participate. The crowd would roar its approval as Horus struck down Seth and wail in shared grief with Isis. They would sing hymns in response to the priestly actors' lines. This collective catharsis was the ultimate purpose. By participating in the death and rebirth of Osiris, the people reaffirmed their own hope for resurrection. By witnessing the victory of Horus over chaos, they felt their own world was made safer and more orderly. The sacred drama was a powerful act of communal magic, a ritual that used every tool of theater costume, music, dialogue, and special effects to dissolve the boundary between myth and reality, making every citizen a participant in the eternal, divine story that gave their civilization its meaning and its enduring strength. While the grand dramas brought the divine myths to life for the public, the daily maintenance of the temple's sacred energy was a far more private, meticulous duty. This brings us to the 11th sacred practice, the constant and vital work of purifying the sacred spaces themselves. For the ancient Egyptians, a temple was not just a building where the gods lived. It was a living, breathing organism, a piece of the primordial mound of creation that had to be kept perfectly insulated from the chaotic, impure forces of the outside world. Spiritual contamination was a constant threat, and it was the priest's unwavering responsibility to enact a daily defense, using a powerful combination of water, fire, and sacred words to reinforce the boundaries between the divine and mortal realms. This purification ritual was a precise and systematic sweeping of the entire temple complex, moving from the outermost walls inward toward the Holy of Holies. The process began each morning at the sacred lake, an essential feature of every major temple complex. This was not a reservoir for bathing. It was a symbol of the primordial waters of Nun, the chaotic ocean that existed before creation. The priests would draw water from this lake using special bronze vessels, believing it had been transformed from chaos into a potent tool of order through its containment within the temple grounds. This water, known as Nemset, was considered spiritually charged, capable of washing away not just dirt, but malevolent influences and negative energies. Armed with these vessels, the priests would start at the temple's massive entrance pylon. As they sprinkled the water in a careful, deliberate pattern, they recited spells from the book of the temple, specific incantations designed to reactivate the protective magic woven into the very stones. The words were as important as the action. A typical chant might be far from this place, O you whose coming is darkness, whose going forth is shadow. I have brought to you the eye of Horus, that you may be cleansed with it. With each step inward through the open sunlit courtyards and into the darker, columned hypostyle halls, the ritual intensified. The water was not splashed haphazardly. It was flicked with a ceremonial bundle of papyrus reeds, a plant associated with the delta marshes where Isis hid her infant son Horus, thus imbued with protective properties. Following the water came the smoke. The priests would light censers filled with a precise blend of resins, frankincense for purity, myrrh for its connection to the gods and the afterlife, and kaiphai, a complex temple-made incense with 16 ingredients including honey, wine, and raisins, known for its soothing and purifying scent. The censer, or menkit, was swung in a specific figure 8 pattern representing the infinite and eternal. The rising smoke served a dual purpose. It carried prayers upward to the gods, and it physically filled the space, pushing out any lingering impurities. The priests watched the smoke's behavior closely. A clean, steady column meant the space was accepted. Erratic, choking smoke could indicate a presence that required further cleansing. The final layer of defense was the creation of salt circles. At key thresholds before the entrance to a hall of offerings, or at the base of the statue sanctuary, a priest would pour a thin, unbroken line of pure natron salt or sea salt. Salt, as a preserver and desiccant, was the ultimate symbol of anti-decay, of halting the entropy that defined the chaotic outside world. This line acted as a potent spiritual barrier, a boundary that no impure force or malevolent spirit could cross. The entire ritual was a continuous, daily rebuilding of the temple's magical architecture, ensuring that the further inward one progressed, the more concentrated and potent the divine energy became, culminating in the perfectly pure, silent darkness of the sanctuary where the god resided, a bubble of perfect order sustained in a universe constantly threatening to slide back into chaos. This sacred duty of maintaining the calendar was a monumental task of celestial engineering, a continuous effort to harmonize the immutable rhythms of the heavens with the fluid needs of human devotion. The ancient Egyptian priests were the keepers of time itself, tasked with a mathematical puzzle of epic proportions, reconciling the sun's yearly journey with the moon's monthly cycles to create a religious calendar that ensured every festival occurred in its proper season, under its most potent celestial alignment. Their solution was a breathtakingly sophisticated system that kept their civilization in sync with the cosmos for millennia. At the heart of their challenge were three natural yet conflicting cycles. The solar year, the time it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun, is approximately 365.25 days. The lunar month, the time from one new moon to the next, averages about 29.5 days, resulting in a lunar year of just 354 days. Then there was the all-important agricultural and hydrological cycle of the Nile, with its life-giving inundation beginning right around the summer solstice. The civic calendar, for simplicity's sake, fixed the year at a neat 365 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days each, plus an additional 5 epigomenal days added at the end to honor the births of the gods Osiris, Horus, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys. But this tidy civil calendar quickly fell out of step with the solar year, losing about 1 day every 4 years. For the priests, this drifting was completely unacceptable. A festival meant to celebrate the rebirth of the sun at the winter solstice could not be allowed to slowly drift into the sweltering heat of summer. The timing was everything. The most critical anchor point was the heliacal rising of Sirius, which heralded the Nile's flood. This event had to be predicted with absolute accuracy months in advance so farmers could prepare their fields and communities could store their goods. To bridge this gap, the priests maintained a separate, parallel lunar calendar specifically for religious observance. This meant they were effectively running 2 calendars simultaneously, constantly comparing them and making adjustments. Their genius lay in an observation-based intercalation system, a form of leap year. While they did not add a single day every 4 years like our modern system, they added entire lunar months when necessary to keep the lunar and solar cycles in alignment. This process was governed by a precise rule. They knew that the heliacal rising of Sirius, the key solar event, should ideally occur within the final month of the lunar year. A team of temple astronomers would watch for the star's first appearance in the dawn sky. If Sirius rose before the first day of the final lunar month, it was a sign that the lunar year was too short and had fallen behind the solar cycle. In that case, they would declare that the current year would have 13 lunar months instead of 12, inserting an entire extra month to reset the alignment. This extra month was not a random addition, it was a duplicate of the previous month, ensuring the ritual purity of the calendar's structure. The mathematical foresight required for this was staggering. By the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Egyptian astronomers had fully quantified the quarter-day drift of the solar year. The famous decree of Canopus, issued by Pharaoh Ptolemy III in 239 BCE, explicitly proposed adding 1 day to the calendar every 4 years to correct the discrepancy, a reform that was not adopted at the time but demonstrates their advanced understanding. This knowledge allowed them to predict the behavior of the calendar centuries into the future, scheduling the great festivals like the beautiful Feast of the Valley or the Opet Festival with unerring accuracy. The responsibility for announcing these dates fell to the lector priests, who would issue the official liturgical calendar from the temple at the beginning of each year, a document that dictated the rhythm of religious life for every community in Egypt from the capital to the smallest village, ensuring that the entire nation worshipped in unison, its rituals perfectly timed to harness greatest possible divine power from the cosmos. Beyond the stone walls and star charts, the divine presence of the gods took a tangible, living form in the 13th sacred practice, the profound and complex management of animal cults. For the ancient Egyptians, the divine was not always a distant, abstract force. It could be glimpsed in the graceful stride of a cat, the powerful charge of a bull, or the soaring flight of a falcon. Certain animals were seen as living avatars, vessels chosen by the gods to house a fragment of their divine essence here on earth. The priest's duty to care for these sacred creatures was a heavy responsibility, blending the roles of zookeeper, theologian, and mortician in a cycle of reverence that extended from birth to an elaborate mummified burial. The most famous of these living gods was undoubtedly the Apis bull, believed to be the earthly herald and physical manifestation of the creator god Ptah. The identification of a new Apis bull was a moment of national celebration, governed by a very specific set of divine markers. Priests would scour the countryside for a calf born with a unique pattern of markings, a white triangle on its forehead, a winged scarab pattern on its back, and double hairs on its tail. When such a calf was found, it was not simply captured. It was escorted with immense ceremony to its own luxurious palace, the Temple of Apis in Memphis. Here, the bull lived a life of unparalleled luxury. It was not kept in a stall, but in a spacious, pillared hall where priests attended to its every need. Its diet was a carefully curated menu of the finest grains, choice cuts of meat, and honey cakes, all prepared and presented by high-ranking priests. The bull had its own harem of cows, its own swimming pool for exercise, and even a dedicated courtyard where the public could, on certain feast days, come to gaze upon the living god and receive its blessing. This practice extended far beyond the Apis bull. At the temple of the goddess Bastet in Bubastis, thousands of cats were revered as her sacred vessels. Pilgrims would travel from across Egypt to donate a mummified cat to the temple as an offering to the goddess, hoping to secure her favor. To meet this enormous demand, the priests operated what can only be described as the world's first large-scale animal breeding program. Temple grounds housed catteries where cats were raised specifically for this pious purpose, cared for by priests until their natural death, after which they were mummified and sold to worshippers. Similarly, the ibis, sacred to the god of wisdom Thoth, was bred in temple aviaries at Saqqara. Crocodiles embodying the god Sobek were kept in sacred pools at the temple of Kam Ombo, adorned with gold earrings and jeweled bracelets and hand-fed choice cuts of meat by the priests. When one of these divine animals eventually died, its passing was treated not as a simple death but as a moment of profound spiritual transition, triggering an elaborate funerary rite that mirrored the burial of a pharaoh. The death of the Apis bull was a period of national mourning. The bull's body was transported by sacred barge down the Nile to the embalming workshop at the temple complex. The mummification process was as intricate as that for a human, taking 70 days and involving the same priests who served the pharaohs. The internal organs were removed and placed in special canopic jars topped with the heads of the 4 sons of Horus. The body was packed with natron, anointed with resins, and meticulously wrapped in layers of the finest linen. The culmination of this sacred journey was the burial, an event of staggering scale and devotion. The final resting place for the Apis bulls was the Serapeum at Saqqara, an underground necropolis that is a breathtaking feat of ancient engineering. The priests constructed a series of massive, labyrinthine tunnels deep into the living rock. Along these corridors, they carved out enormous niches, each housing a single, colossal black granite sarcophagus. Weighing over 60 tons each, these sarcophagi were polished to a mirror finish and sealed with a massive stone lid. The effort to carve, transport, and position these stone coffins is almost unimaginable, a testament to the immense resources and reverence dedicated to ensuring the bull's smooth passage into the divine realm. The burial ceremony itself would have been a solemn procession of priests carrying the mummified bull down into the darkness, chanting hymns to Ptah and Osiris before sealing the god animal in its granite tomb for eternity. The care expended on these creatures reveals a theology where the boundary between human, animal, and god was beautifully fluid. and where the priests served as the devoted guardians of every sacred link in the great chain of being. Yet the divine communion nurtured by these sacred calendars and animal cults required a constant, flowing sustenance, a gift that symbolized the very essence of life itself. This brings us to the 14th sacred practice, the profound and elegant ritual of libation ceremonies, where the act of pouring a simple liquid became a powerful sacrament of connection, nourishment, and rebirth. For the ancient Egyptians, water was not merely a resource, it was the primordial substance from which all creation emerged, the sustaining force of the Nile that made life in the desert possible. To offer a liquid was to offer the fundamental building block of existence, a gesture that sustained the gods, refreshed the spirits of the dead, and reaffirmed the eternal cycle of renewal. The ceremony was a study in precise, graceful movement. A priest, having undergone the strict purification rites, would approach the altar or the tomb stela holding a special vessel known as a hesed jar. These were not ordinary pots. They were often crafted from exquisite faience, a glazed quartz ceramic in a brilliant blue-green color that evoked the life-giving waters of the Nile and the heavens. The jar itself was shaped symbolically. Some were modeled after the hieroglyph for offer, a long-spouted vase, while others took the form of a breast, emphasizing the act of nurturing and providing milk to a divine child. The priest's posture was equally important. He would typically stand or kneel, holding the jar in both hands, often with one arm crossed over the other in a gesture of reverence and submission before the divine. The act of pouring was never a hasty splash. It was a controlled, continuous stream, arching from the spout of the jar to the base of the altar or onto a special offering slab carved with channels to direct the flow. As the liquid fell, the priest recited a standardized invocation known as the Hotepti Nissu formula, an offering which the king gives to Osiris, Lord of Eternity, that he may give invocation offerings of bread, beer, cattle, fowl, and all things good and pure for the spirit of the revered one. This chant was not a mere request, it was a performative utterance, a magical act that transformed the physical liquid into a spiritual essence that the gods or the deceased could consume. The choice of liquid was never arbitrary, each carried a deep and specific symbolic meaning. Fresh, cool water was the most common and fundamental offering, representing purity, the primordial nun, and the basic sustenance of life. It was the first and last offering made, a way to spiritually cleanse and refresh the recipient. Beer, the staple drink of all Egyptians, symbolized joy, celebration, and the intoxicating power of the gods. It was often offered to deities associated with festivity, like the goddess Hathor, and its effervescence was seen as a spark of divine energy. Wine, a more expensive and luxurious commodity imported from the Delta region, represented the blood of the gods, specifically the blood of the Eye of Horus, which was shed in his battle with Seth and subsequently restored by Thoth. Its red color and intoxicating properties made it a powerful offering for rites of resurrection and transformation. Milk, particularly from a sacred cow associated with the goddess Hathor, was the ultimate symbol of nourishment, motherhood, and royal lineage. To offer milk was to offer the sustenance of a goddess, a gift that connected the recipient to the divine source of life and care. This ritual extended beyond the temple walls into the most personal acts of devotion. At a family tomb during the beautiful feast of the valley, a son would pour a libation of water and beer for his deceased father, calling his name aloud so his spirit would awaken and partake. In the darkest chamber of a pyramid, the funerary priests would perform the same rite for the entombed pharaoh, ensuring his spirit would have the strength to navigate the perils of the underworld. In every context, from the grandest state temple to the simplest household shrine, the graceful arc of poured liquid created a tangible link between the worlds, a flowing bridge of devotion that quenched a divine thirst and sustained the eternal, invisible bonds that held the universe together. But the power to protect was not entrusted solely to grand rituals or celestial observations. It was also concentrated into small, potent objects that could be carried by anyone. This brings us to the 15th sacred practice, the meticulous and powerful art of protective magic and amulet creation. In a world perceived as filled with unseen threats, from malevolent spirits and the evil eye to sudden illness and venomous creatures, the priests served as divine armorers, crafting and consecrating small shields of power that offered a personal defense against the chaos that lurked at the edges of life. These amulets were far more than decorative jewelry. They were functional spiritual technology, each type engineered through precise rituals to perform a specific protective function. The creation of an amulet began with a sacred choice of material, each substance believed to possess its own inherent magical property. The most common was Egyptian faience, a brilliant blue or green glazed quartz ceramic that was more than just affordable. Its color was deeply symbolic. The vibrant blue evoked the life-giving waters of the Nile and the heavens, while the green represented rebirth and vitality, the lushness of the papyrus marsh where the goddess Isis hid her infant son. The process of firing faience caused a efflorescence glaze to bloom on its surface, a phenomenon the priests saw as a literal manifestation of divine creation and transformation, making it the perfect vessel for magic. For those who could afford greater power, semi-precious stones were selected for their specific vibrational energies. Red jasper and carnelian, the color of blood and the rising sun, were linked to the blood of Isis and the fiery power of the sun god Ra, making them potent weapons against forces of darkness. Lapis lazuli, with its deep blue hue flecked with golden pyrite, was considered a chip of the night sky, a direct connection to the cosmos and the gods themselves. Even humble materials like gold, silver, copper, and certain woods like ebony and acacia were chosen for their divine associations and durability. The true magic, however, was not in the material alone but in the ritual of its activation. The crafting of an amulet was a ceremonial act performed in the temple workshops by specially trained priest artisans. As the craftsmen began to carve or mold the chosen material into its prescribed shape, a lector priest would stand nearby, reciting the exact incantations from a magical papyrus that corresponded to the amulet's purpose. The spoken word, or heka, was the force that charged the object. For a Wedjat-eye amulet, the priest might chant, "I have come seeking the eye of Horus, that I may bring it and put it in place. It shall flame against the violence of any enemy." The sound waves of these potent words were believed to physically vibrate through the amulet as it was being made, embedding the magic into its very structure. Once the physical form was complete, the consecration ceremony began. The amulet would be placed on a small altar and presented with the 4 elemental powers. It was anointed with sacred oil earth, sensed with smoke from a brazier air, touched with the flame of a lamp fire, and sprinkled with Nemset water from the sacred lake water. This fourfold blessing balanced the amulet's essence and fully awakened its latent power, transforming it from a mere ornament into an active guardian. The variety of amulets was vast, each with a highly specialized function. The most universal was the Wedjat, or Eye of Horus. This symbol represented the eye that was torn from the god Horus during his battle with Seth and miraculously restored by Thoth. Worn as an amulet, it offered general protection, good health, and bodily wholeness, healing the wearer just as the eye was healed. For a woman in childbirth, a priest might prescribe an amulet of the hippopotamus goddess Taweret, a fearsome figure shown standing on her hind legs. Her composite form, part hippo, part lion, part crocodile, combined the most powerful protective animals in Egypt into a single entity that could fiercely guard a mother and her newborn against the demons that preyed on the vulnerable. A soldier marching off to war would be given a tightly folded papyrus amulet, a miniature version of the royal annals inscribed with the names of conquered foreign enemies. The very act of folding and binding this tiny scroll, often placed in a tubular case and worn around the neck, was a symbolic act of containment, magically binding the threats the soldier would face. Perhaps the most important amulet was the heart scarab, a large beetle-shaped charm carved from green stone and inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead. Placed over the heart of a mummy, it was designed to prevent the heart from bearing witness against its owner during the final judgment, literally pleading on behalf of the deceased to secure a favorable verdict and eternal life. Through these consecrated objects, the priests extended their protective reach beyond the temple walls, placing a piece of divine order into the hands of every person, empowering them to walk through a dangerous world with a layer of sacred armor fashioned by the hands of the gods' own intermediaries. These sacred processions were nothing short of a divine parade, a breathtaking spectacle where the gods themselves emerged from the silent darkness of their sanctuaries to walk among their people. The most magnificent of these events was the annual Opet festival, a celebration of such scale and significance that it required months of meticulous preparation by every level of the priesthood. The entire city of Thebes became a stage for this divine drama, as the statues of the gods Ammon, Mut, and Khonsu were transported from their home at the temple of Karnak on a 2-mile journey south to the Luxor temple, their southern sanctuary. This was not a simple relocation. It was a symbolic rebirth of the pharaoh's divine power and a rejuvenation of the gods themselves, a ritual that reaffirmed the very cosmic order of the universe. The centerpiece of this grand event was the divine bark, or neshmet, a magnificent portable shrine that served as the vessel for the god statue. This was no ordinary litter. It was a masterwork of art and engineering, crafted from the finest Lebanese cedar imported at great cost and overlaid with gold leaf and electrum that shimmered blindingly in the Egyptian sun. The hull of the bark was often carved to resemble a papyrus skiff, harkening back to the myth of the solar bark that carried the sun god Ra across the sky each day. At its center stood a small, enclosed shrine, a miniature version of the temple's Holy of Holies, veiled from the public eye and housing the sacred cult statue. The entire structure was designed to be both incredibly heavy and exquisitely balanced, requiring immense physical strength and perfect coordination from the team of 24 high priests chosen for the honor of bearing its weight on long, reinforced carrying poles. The technique for carrying this immense sacred load was a carefully guarded priestly secret passed down through generations. The bearers did not simply hoist the poles onto their shoulders. They moved in a synchronized, rocking gait, a rhythmic step that was both a practical method for distributing the enormous weight and a ritual dance designed to mimic the gentle sway of a boat on the Nile's currents. This motion created the powerful illusion that the god's bark was floating just above the ground, gliding effortlessly through the streets as if on water. The lead bearers, usually the highest-ranking prophets, were trained to interpret the subtle shifts in the bark's weight, reading these movements as divine signals. A sudden forward lurch could be interpreted as the god's eager approval, while a hesitation or a dip might signal a need to alter the route or pause for additional prayers. Days before the procession even began, other teams of priests were hard at work consecrating the entire route. Using bundles of sacred papyrus reeds, they sprinkled water drawn from the temple's sacred lake, ritually cleansing every inch of the path from Karnak's Great Gate to the entrance of Luxor Temple. They then marked the boundaries of the sacred way by pouring thin, unbroken lines of pure white natron salt along the edges of the road, creating a spiritual barrier to keep chaotic influences at bay. Fresh sand from the eastern desert, symbolizing purity, was spread over the main thoroughfare to create a clean, holy path for the god to tread upon. Every doorway and window along the route was inspected, and homeowners were instructed to burn incense as the procession passed to further purify the air and please the passing deity. Managing the crowds for such an event was a monumental feat of logistics and psychology. The entire population of Thebes, swelled by thousands of pilgrims from across Egypt, would line the route, straining for a glimpse of the divine. Temple guards and Medjay police formed human chains to keep the main path clear, but the priests employed a far more effective tool than mere force: the psychology of awe. The procession was deliberately designed to overwhelm the senses and inspire a collective, reverent silence. It was led by ranks of junior priests shaking sistrum rattles and beating ceremonial drums, creating a hypnotic, driving rhythm. They were followed by groups of chanters singing the god's praises in the low, resonant Shenu drone, their combined voices generating a palpable vibration. Next came offerings: heaps of bread, baskets of fruit, and live animals destined for the temple altars, a display of abundance meant to showcase the god's generosity. Then came the moment of supreme revelation. As the divine bark itself approached, a wave of silence would often fall over the crowd, broken only by the sound of weeping and spontaneous cries of adoration. The sight of the colossal, shimmering vessel seemingly floating above the shoulders of the priests, surrounded by a cloud of incense smoke, was a visceral, unforgettable experience of the divine made manifest. People would thrust their arms toward the bark, not in demand, but in a gesture of worship known as the Henu, a sign of jubilant praise. They shouted personal prayers, believing that a prayer spoken in the direct presence of the moving God had infinitely more power than one offered at a home altar. The culmination of the journey at Luxor Temple was a moment of intense, concentrated divinity. The bark was carried through the towering pylons and into the inner courts, where it was met by the waiting statue of the king. In a secret ceremony within the temple, the priests performed rituals that recharged the divine essence within both the god and the pharaoh, renewing the king's ka, or life force, and solidifying his right to rule as the living son of Ammon. After several weeks of celebration, the entire procession would reverse, escorting the rejuvenated gods back to their home at Karnak, leaving behind a city and a people who had been touched by divinity, their faith reinforced by the undeniable, awe-inspiring power of a god who walked among them. The transition from a layperson to a sacred intermediary was not a simple promotion. It was a complete metaphysical transformation achieved through a secret and grueling series of initiation rites. These ceremonies were so closely guarded that no explicit step-by-step manual has survived. Instead, we must piece together their profound nature from cryptic temple inscriptions, rare accounts from Greek historians who were later initiated, and the powerful symbolism embedded in the art and architecture of the temples themselves. The journey began not with a ceremony, but with a period of intense study. A candidate, usually chosen from a young age for his intelligence and devotion, would first have to master the vast body of priestly knowledge. This was not merely academic, it was a memorization of hundreds of hieroglyphic signs, the complex rhythms of astronomical charts, the precise recipes for sacred unguents and incenses, and the correct pronunciation of powerful spells that could not be written down for fear of falling into profane hands. Their first test was one of memory and intellect, a rigorous oral examination before a council of high priests to prove they were a worthy vessel for this divine knowledge. Once their scholarly worth was confirmed, the candidate faced the true beginning of the initiation, a reenactment of the Osirian myth, a symbolic journey of death and rebirth. The aspirant was led deep into the subterranean chambers of the temple, spaces that represented the underworld itself. Here, in the absolute darkness and silence broken only by the drip of water and the low chanting of unseen priests, the candidate was subjected to a series of ordeals designed to strip away their old identity. They were likely deprived of food and sleep to induce a state of heightened sensitivity and vivid hallucination. They may have been confronted with terrifying masks and sudden, loud noises to test their resolve and break down their ego. The Greek historian and traveler Herodotus, who claimed to have been initiated, wrote that he was led through labyrinthine passages and shown certain sacred things that were too awesome to describe, hinting at powerful psychodramas staged by the priesthood. The climax of this ordeal was the symbolic death. The candidate, exhausted and disoriented, would be laid within a stone sarcophagus or a ritual pit, a powerful representation of burial. For a terrifying period, they would be left alone in this tomb to confront the ultimate fear of non-existence and the failure of their own spirit. This was the crucial test: to surrender completely to the experience, to die to the mortal self. Emerging from this trial, the candidate was met by the high priest, now embodying the god Thoth or Anubis, who performed a ritual mimicking the opening of the mouth ceremony. This was their rebirth. They were given a new, pure white linen garment and a secret priestly name, signifying they were now a new being, born into the service of the god. They were anointed with sacred oils and presented with the symbols of their new office, perhaps a scribe's palette or a specific amulet denoting their rank. The final act was an oath of secrecy, sworn upon the lives of the pharaoh and the gods themselves, a vow that carried the penalty of a horrifying death if broken. With this oath, the transformation was complete. The ordinary individual was gone, replaced by a Hem-Netjer, a servant of the god, a purified vessel ready to stand between humanity and the divine, his very existence now dedicated to maintaining the delicate balance of the universe. Behind the veils of incense and the echoes of sacred chants, the great temples of Egypt operated with the precision of a modern corporation, their spiritual power underpinned by an astonishingly efficient and meticulous system of administration. This vast bureaucratic machine was the domain of the temple scribes, priests who wielded the reed brush with the same authority as their colleagues wielded the censer, ensuring that every grain of wheat, every jar of oil, and every divine pronouncement was recorded, categorized, and preserved for eternity. Their work transformed the temple from merely a house of worship into the economic and administrative heart of the community, a powerhouse of industry, agriculture, and law that managed assets on a staggering scale. The tool of their trade was not the formal, monumental hieroglyphs carved into stone for the gods and kings to see, but a swift, practical cursive script known as hieratic. Developed alongside hieroglyphs for use on perishable materials, hieratic was the everyday handwriting of the priests and officials, written from right to left with a reed brush on sheets of papyrus or flakes of limestone called ostroka. Its flowing, connected characters allowed a trained scribe to document complex transactions with speed and efficiency. While it looks entirely different from hieroglyphic writing to the untrained eye, it was a direct simplification, with each hieratic sign corresponding to a hieroglyphic one. Mastery of this script, with its hundreds of signs and its own grammatical nuances, was a core component of priestly training, separating the literate administrator from the common laborer and granting them access to the inner workings of the state's most powerful institutions. The scope of their record-keeping was breathtakingly comprehensive. Vast archives like those partially recovered from the Ramesseum or the Temple of Abydos reveal a relentless cataloging of all incoming and outgoing goods. Every offering presented to the god was logged before and after its spiritual consumption. Inventories detail the reversion of these offerings, listing exactly how the blessed bread, beer, and meat were redistributed to the temple staff, from the high priest down to the lowliest washer of ritual linens. We have records of temple-owned farms detailing expected yields of emmer wheat and barley, herds of cattle counted down to the last calf, and workshops tracking the output of linen production by the bolt. This was essential for feeding a large permanent staff that could number in the thousands for a major complex like Karnak, and for managing the temple's role as a central grain bank and distributor of rations for the entire region. Perhaps the most critical administrative duty was the documentation of divine will itself. The oracular decrees delivered during public processions were not left to memory. Scribes carrying wooden writing boards would walk alongside the god's bark, immediately recording the divine judgments as they were issued. These records were then transferred to formal papyrus scrolls, creating a permanent legal record stored in the temple's House of Life. A dispute over land ownership, for instance, could be settled by producing a papyrus from 20 years prior that contained the god's decree on the matter. These documents were considered incontrovertible evidence, their authority deriving from the god who had pronounced the judgment. The temple thus became the primary repository for contracts, property deeds, and wills, all sanctified by divine association and meticulously maintained by its scribbled priests. This immense flow of data was not merely stored, it was actively analyzed to guide future action. Priests would compare annual harvest totals from temple estates to predict grain supplies for the coming year. Records of dream interpretations were cross-referenced to identify recurring symbols and refine their diagnostic meanings. By auditing offering lists from previous festivals, they could calculate the precise quantities of food, incense, and cloth needed for the next major ceremony, avoiding both shortage and wasteful surplus. This continuous cycle of recording, analyzing, and planning allowed the temple to function with remarkable stability for millennia. Its scribes ensuring that the divine household was not only spiritually potent but also impeccably managed, its earthly power built upon a foundation of perfectly ordered lines of hieratic script. Within the hallowed halls of the temple, sound was not merely an accompaniment to ritual. It was the very medium through which creation could be sustained and the gods could be nourished. The 19th sacred practice involved the priest-musicians who wielded specialized instruments, each one a carefully crafted key designed to unlock specific divine frequencies and maintain the harmonic balance of the cosmos. Their performance was a precise science of vibration, where every note, rhythm, and resonance was calculated to achieve a specific spiritual effect, transforming the temple into a colossal instrument of power. The most iconic of these sacred tools was the sistrum, a ceremonial rattle inextricably linked to the goddesses Hathor and Isis. Its distinctive shape was a symphony of symbolism. The handle often represented the stem of the papyrus plant, a symbol of life and growth emerging from the primordial marshes. At the top was a carved head of Hathor with her cow ears signifying her nurturing yet powerful nature. Arched between this head and the frame were metal wires, strung with small discs that produced a shimmering, metallic rustle when shaken. This sound was believed to be uniquely pleasing to the goddesses. It was said to mimic the rustling of the papyrus reeds in the breeze of the marsh where Isis hid with the infant Horus, and its bright, sharp tone was thought to drive away negative forces and chaos, much like the sound of a snake charmer's instrument warding off serpents. A priestess shaking the sistrum did so with a specific flicking wrist motion, creating a constant, shimmering cloud of sound that purified the air and called the divine feminine presence into the space. For deeper, more resonant frequencies, the priests turned to stringed instruments, primarily various forms of harps and lyres. These were not the large concert harps of later eras, but smaller, portable instruments often held upright in the lap. The soundbox was frequently covered in richly decorated leather, etched with scenes of gods or protective symbols, and the strings were made from gut, carefully tuned to specific intervals. The act of plucking these strings was seen as a direct manipulation of the cosmic threads of fate and order. The deep, warm tones of the lower strings were associated with the earth and the underworld, invoking gods like Osiris and Ptah. The higher, clearer pitches were linked to the heavens and solar deities like Ra and Horus. A skilled priest-musician could play melodies that were believed to literally attune the human soul to the harmony of the universe, easing anxiety and opening the heart to receive divine inspiration. Temple reliefs often show blind harpists playing for the god, their lack of physical sight symbolizing their inward vision and their pure connection to the music's spiritual source, untouched by worldly distraction. The foundational layer of this sacred soundscape was provided by percussion, which established the heartbeat of the ritual. This included frame drums often played by priestesses, whose steady, resonant thump was thought to emulate the regenerative, rhythmic pulse of creation itself. Clappers made of ivory or precious wood and often carved in the shape of human hands or forearms provided a sharp, cracking counter-rhythm. The most fascinating percussive element, however, was the use of the human body itself. Priests are depicted in art stamping their feet in a ritual dance, their footsteps echoing on the stone floor to create a deep, grounding vibration. This was not a random dance but a measured, stomping step known as the Iba ritual, believed to shake the earth and awaken the dormant powers within the temple precinct, driving chaotic spirits from the sacred ground with its powerful, rhythmic impact. Reconstructing this ancient music is a challenging but fascinating endeavor. While no written musical notation survives in the modern sense, we have a wealth of visual evidence from temple walls showing the precise hand positions of harpists and the playing techniques of percussionists. Most importantly, we have the instruments themselves preserved in tomb goods. By studying the construction of a 3,000-year-old sistrum from the Louvre or a harp from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, musicians and scholars can replicate their exact dimensions and materials. Using this data, they can determine their probable tuning ranges and sonic characteristics. When these reconstructed instruments are played together as shown in the reliefs, a harp providing a melodic drone, a sistrum adding its heavenly shimmer, and a drum marking the sacred heartbeat, the result is a powerful, trance-inducing resonance. This soundscape allows us to experience a faint echo of the temple's original purpose, not as a silent museum, but as a vibrant, humming engine of creation, where carefully orchestrated sound was the active, sustaining force that pleased the gods and held the stars in their courses. While the grand public rituals and the meticulous temple administration sustained the community's connection to the gods, the priests' own bodies were the most fundamental instruments of their sacred office. This brings us to the 20th sacred practice, a discipline that turned the very act of eating into a form of worship and purification, the intricate system of ritual fasting and dietary restrictions. For the ancient Egyptian priest, maintaining a state of readiness to serve the gods was a continuous endeavor that extended far beyond the initial morning ablutions. It required a constant vigilance over everything that passed their lips. Their diet was not a matter of personal preference or nutrition alone. It was a carefully controlled spiritual regimen designed to keep their physical vessel free from the contaminants of the chaotic outer world. The most widespread and well-documented prohibition was the avoidance of fish. This restriction might seem surprising given the Nile's central role in Egyptian life and its abundance of fish, but the spiritual reasoning was deeply rooted in their mythology. Two major myths informed this taboo. The first involved the great battle between the gods Horus and Seth. In some versions of the story, when Seth dismembered the body of Osiris and scattered the pieces across Egypt, it was a Nile carp or an oxyhynchus fish that swallowed Osiris's phallus, thereby desecrating the god and preventing his complete restoration. The second story comes from the contendings of Horus and Seth, where both gods transform into hippopotamuses and submerge in the Nile. Isis, attempting to spear Seth to help her son Horus, accidentally strikes Horus instead. She then apologetically tries to spear Seth, but he convinces her to relent, an act of imperfection and fallibility that was associated with the fish in the water who witnessed the event. Consequently, fish were seen as creatures of chaos, associated with Seth's treachery and the imperfection of the natural world. Consuming them was believed to introduce that same chaos and impurity into the priest's body, rendering him unfit to approach the pure, ordered space of the god's sanctuary. Another significant, though less universally applied, restriction was on beans, particularly fava beans. The Greek historian Herodotus reported this, noting that the Egyptian priests cannot endure even to look upon beans, which they consider an unclean kind of pulse. The rationale here is more complex and likely tied to both practical observation and spiritual symbolism. Beans were known to cause significant flatulence and digestive discomfort, physical processes that the priests would have associated with the body's production of impure, chaotic gases. More esoterically, the bean plant's hollow stem may have been seen as a conduit for spirits or negative forces. and its tendency to cause vivid dreams or night terrors in some individuals would have been interpreted as an unwanted opening to chaotic spiritual influences during the vulnerable state of sleep. For a priest who needed to maintain absolute mental clarity and spiritual Chinese letter, such an effect was unacceptable. It is crucial to understand that these restrictions were not monolithic across all of Egypt or all priestly ranks. The practice varied significantly between different temples dedicated to different gods. A priest serving the crocodile god Sobek in the Fayum, for instance, might have had a very different relationship with fish and other aquatic life than a priest of the solar god Ra in Heliopolis. Most fascinating are the dietary rules for the priests of the goddess Hathor at Dendera. Hathor was a goddess of joy, music, and intoxication, and her cult involved the consumption of beer and wine in ritual context. However, even in this more relaxed atmosphere, her priests were likely prohibited from eating certain bitter vegetables like lettuce or onions, which were associated with the god Min and the more aggressive aspects of male fertility, considered incompatible with Hathor's nurturing feminine energy. These local variations highlight the sophisticated way Egyptian theology adapted general principles of purity to the specific nature and mythology of individual deities. The ultimate expression of this dietary discipline was the practice of periodic ritual fasting. This was not a continuous state of starvation, but a strategic cleansing undertaken before major festivals, during specific phases of the moon, or when a particularly important oracle or ritual was required. A fast could last for 3 or 4 days, during which the priest would consume only water, perhaps sweetened with a little honey and simple, unleavened bread. The purpose was to empty the body of all physical waste and to still the digestive processes, which were believed to create a kind of spiritual static or fog that could cloud the priest's perception and hinder his ability to receive clear divine communication. By purifying the body in this way, the priest aimed to achieve a state of heightened sensitivity and clarity, making himself a clearer vessel, a more receptive antenna for the will of the gods. This careful curation of consumption was the final, intimate layer of their sacred service, a daily, personal sacrifice that ensured their physical form was always as pristine and prepared as the temple altars they tended. But the priest's internal purity, achieved through fasting and discipline, demanded an external expression just as potent. Moving from the inner sanctum of the body to the outer presentation, we arrive at the 21st sacred practice, the profound art of divine costume and regalia. For the ancient Egyptian priest, the ritual garments and jewelry were not mere decorations or uniforms. They were a second skin of power, a wearable temple designed to magnetize divine energy and physically manifest the priest's transformed state from a mortal man into a consecrated vessel worthy of standing before the gods. Each element of their attire, from the linen of their kilts to the gold on their fingers, was imbued with specific symbolic meaning and magical function, creating a complete system of sacred armor. The foundation of every ritual outfit was the same pure white linen that defined their daily purification. However, for high ceremonies, this linen was not simple. It was often of the finest, almost translucent quality, woven from hand-spun threads and bleached to a brilliant white that shimmered in the torchlight of the temple. The garment itself was a precise copy of the clothing worn by the gods in temple reliefs, a wraparound kilt with a starched triangular apron front, or for higher ranks, a long, close-fitting robe with elaborate fringing. The key was its spotlessness. Any stain or tear was not just a practical concern but a catastrophic spiritual breach, a point of entry for chaotic forces. This white fabric represented the primordial state of purity, a blank slate upon which the symbols of power could be placed. Upon this white canvas, the priests layered their most powerful tools, ritual jewelry. This was not personal adornment for vanity. Each piece was a consecrated object charged with Heka and designed for a specific purpose. The most common amulet was the Menat necklace, a heavy, multi-stranded piece composed of dozens of faience beads, culminating in a counterpoise often shaped like a fertility figure or the head of the goddess Hathor. Though it looked like a necklace, it was rarely worn around the neck during active rituals. Instead, the priest would hold the counterpoise in one hand and rhythmically shake the strands of beads with the other, creating a soft, rustling sound. This auditory vibration was believed to invoke the presence of Hathor and Bastet, goddesses of joy, music, and protection, their benevolent energy pacifying any angry deity and fostering an atmosphere of divine favor. For the highest-ranking priests, the regalia reached its zenith with the donning of ritual animal masks. This was the ultimate act of transformation. A priest embodying the god Anubis would wear a meticulously crafted mask of a jackal's head, made from painted cartonnage linen stiffened with plaster or even gilded wood. The eye holes were strategically placed to limit the priest's peripheral vision, forcing him to focus inward and enhancing his trance state. The mask wasn't meant to be realistic. It was a symbolic representation that allowed the priest to shed his human identity completely and channel the consciousness of the god himself. Temple reliefs at Edfu show priests wearing falcon masks during the reenactment of the triumph of Horus, their human bodies becoming living statues of the celestial deity. The weight of the mask, the restricted breath and vision, all these physical sensations contributed to the psychological shift, convincing both the wearer and the observers that a divine transmutation had truly occurred. The complexity and specificity of these outfits are brilliantly detailed in the reliefs that adorn temple walls. At the Temple of Seti I at Abydos, a magnificent scene shows the king, acting as the high priest, performing a ritual before the god Osiris. His costume is a symphony of symbolism. He wears the tight, ornate kilt of a Sem priest with an apron featuring the head of the bat goddess of heaven. On his head is not the royal crown, but the distinctive leopard skin mantle, its spots representing the star-filled night sky across which the sun god journeyed. Over his shoulder is the Menat necklace, and in his hands he holds a censer and a libation vessel. Every item connects him to a different divine function and myth. The leopard skin marks him as a funerary priest, the Menat connects him to the goddesses, the tools in his hands signify his active role in sustaining the god. This was not a single outfit but a layered language, a visual prayer that the priest wore, each element speaking directly to the gods and affirming his sacred right to serve as their intermediary on earth. Yet the true mastery of the priests was not confined to the rituals performed within the temple walls. It was etched into the very stones beneath their feet. This brings us to the 22nd sacred practice, where the role of the priest expanded into that of a divine architect and cosmic engineer, overseeing the sacred science of temple construction. For the ancient Egyptians, a temple was not merely a building to house a god. It was a physical representation of the universe at the moment of creation, a perfectly ordered machine designed to maintain cosmic balance. Every column, every corridor, and every ceiling was laid out according to precise mathematical principles and celestial alignments, transforming raw stone into a frozen hymn of harmonic proportions. The entire process began with the most critical of all rituals, the stretching of the cord ceremony. This was the mystical act of founding the temple, of imposing divine order onto the chaos of the untouched desert. The ceremony was presided over by the pharaoh and the high priest of the goddess Seshet, the divine scribe and mistress of measurements. Under the light of the stars, they would first identify the circumpolar stars, those that never set, the imperishable ones, to establish true north. Using a sighting tool called a merkit, they would then align the temple's proposed central axis. The ritual itself involved physically hammering stakes into the ground and stretching a cord between them to mark the foundation line. This act reenacted the primordial moment when the creator god Ptah measured the dimensions of the universe and brought it into being. The alignment was never arbitrary. A temple dedicated to a solar deity like Ra would be oriented to the rising sun on the day of a specific festival, so that the dawn light would travel down the main axis and illuminate the inner sanctuary on that hallowed day. A temple for a stellar or lunar deity might be aligned with a significant star or the extremes of the moon's journey across the sky. Once the foundation was ritually established, the priests employed a sophisticated system of sacred geometry to dictate every dimension. They did not use our modern decimal system, but worked with ratios and proportions found in nature, believing these reflected the mind of the gods. The most important of these was the sacred ratio of 1.618 to 1, what we now call the golden ratio or phi. This proportion appears throughout nature in the spiral of a nautilus shell or the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, and the Egyptians saw it as the fundamental building block of a beautiful and harmonious universe. They would use a sequence of numbers where each number is the sum of the two preceding it, such as 3, 5, 8, 13, and 21, to generate this ratio and apply it to the layout of rooms, the height of columns, and the spacing between pillars. A room might be 8 cubits wide and 13 cubits long, its proportions inherently pleasing and sacred because they echoed the very structure of creation. The tools for this immense task were deceptively simple but brilliantly effective. The primary unit of measurement was the royal cubit, a standardized length of approximately 20.6 inches, often meticulously carved from black granite and kept under strict guard in the temple precinct. This master cubit was itself subdivided into 7 palms and 28 digits, a system based on the proportions of the human body and the lunar cycle. For ensuring perfectly level foundations over vast distances, the priests used a simple water level, a length of hollow reed with notched ends filled with water. For creating right angles, they used a knotted rope, by tying 13 equally spaced knots in a rope and having teams of workers stretch it to form a triangle with sides of 3, 4, and 5 knots. They could generate a perfect Pythagorean triangle centuries before the Greek philosopher was born, guaranteeing that their walls rose at flawless 90-degree angles. The result of this sacred science was a building that was a living, breathing cosmological map. The floor represented the primordial mound emerging from the waters of chaos. The columns, often shaped like lotus plants or papyrus bundles, symbolized the marsh that grew upon that mound. The ceiling was painted a deep blue and dotted with golden stars, representing the body of the goddess Nut, the sky. The progression from the bright, open courtyard to the increasingly darker and more restricted halls toward the sanctuary mirrored the soul's journey from the outer world of the profane to the inner world of the divine. The entire structure was a massive spiritual battery, its dimensions and alignments designed to amplify ritual energy, resonate with celestial cycles, and provide a stable, eternal home for the god, a testament to the priest's role as a master builder who could translate the divine blueprint of the heavens into the enduring stone of the earth. Yet the priest's sacred duties extended beyond the living and the divine, reaching into the silent realm of those who had passed. The 23rd practice, spirit communication with the dead, was a vital service that provided comfort to the bereaved and sought wisdom from ancestors, reinforcing the ancient Egyptian belief that death was not an end but a transition, and that the boundary between the worlds was permeable. The priest acted as a skilled mediator, a spiritual telephone operator who could establish a clear, safe line of communication with the departed, using a combination of heartfelt invitation, potent offerings, and powerful words of power to bridge the great divide. This communication most commonly took place at the tomb itself, during festivals like the beautiful Feast of the Valley, when families would picnic in the necropolis to be close to their ancestors. The priest would set up a temporary altar before the tomb's false door, the carved stone facade that served as a mystical interface between the worlds. The ritual began with a series of standard offerings to attract and nourish the spirit: cool water to slake its thirst, a loaf of bread for sustenance, and a bouquet of fresh lotus flowers whose sweet scent was believed to be irresistible to the ba or soul of the deceased. But these were just the initial gestures. To truly get the attention of a specific spirit, the priest would then present what Egyptologists call an invocation offering, a gift personally chosen to appeal to the individual's tastes in life. An inscription from a nobleman's tomb at Saqqara instructs visitors, "O you who live on earth who shall pass by this tomb, if you wish to speak with the revered one, you should offer him a jug of his favorite dark beer and a cut of roasted duck, for he delighted in these things." The scent and essence of these cherished items were believed to act as a powerful beacon, drawing the spirit closer to the world of the living. With the spirit hopefully present, the priest would then recite a formal invitation, known as the purification or voice offering spell. The most crucial part of this incantation was the clear and repeated calling of the deceased's name. The Egyptians believed a name was an essential component of a person's identity. To speak the name of the dead was to actively recreate them, to pull them from the oblivion of the underworld and grant them a moment of renewed existence. A typical chant, as found in the pyramid texts, might be, "O name of the deceased, emerge from the Juwat. See, I have brought you your bread, your beer, your cool water. Come to me that you may hear the words I wish to speak." The priest's trained voice, skilled in the resonant Shenu drone, was thought to carry these words directly into the spiritual realm, a vibration that could not be ignored. Once the connection was established, the nature of the conversation depended entirely on the purpose of the seance. For a grieving family, the goal was often simple comfort. They might ask the priest to pose questions to assure them their loved one was safe and content in the field of reeds. The priest, often entering a light trance state induced by the repetitive chanting and the smoke of Kai-Fi incense, would then interpret subtle signs for the answer: the flicker of the lamp flame, the direction of the incense smoke, or a feeling of coolness in the air, all interpreted as affirmations from the spirit. For matters of greater importance, such as seeking guidance on a business decision or resolving a family dispute, the communication sought was more direct. The priest might use a system of divination, asking the spirit to cause the offering vessel to feel heavier for yes or lighter for no as he lifted it. The most dramatic form of communication, however, was spirit possession, where the priest allowed the ba of the deceased to temporarily inhabit his body and speak through his voice. This was a dangerous undertaking reserved for the most experienced practitioners. To prepare, the priest would undergo an intense purification and might consume a small amount of a psychoactive substance like the blue water lily to alter his consciousness. As the spirit was believed to enter, the priest's voice would change, taking on the cadence and character of the deceased. An account from Deir el-Medina describes a consultation where a widow spoke to her late husband through a possessed priest. The spirit's voice, through the priest, correctly identified the location of a missing family heirloom that had been hidden and forgotten, an act that provided the grieving woman with undeniable proof of her husband's continued presence and care. Whether through gentle reassurance or miraculous revelation, these rituals provided a profound comfort, assuring the living that their loved ones were not lost to them but remained accessible, watching over the family and offering guidance from the beautiful, peaceful world beyond. Yet the grand processions and spirit communications were merely part of a far greater, meticulously orchestrated annual rhythm, a symphony of devotion that reached its crescendo with the 24th sacred practice, the awe-inspiring coordination of seasonal festivals. These were not simple holy days. They were the beating heart of Egyptian society, massive state-sponsored events that temporarily dissolved the boundary between the temple and the street, between the god and the common person. The priest's role transformed from that of a secluded mystic into the ultimate event planner, a master logistician and spiritual director responsible for organizing the movement, feeding, and spiritual engagement of entire cities, all to ensure these colossal ceremonies unfolded with the precision and power necessary to renew the world itself. The scale of planning was staggering, often beginning months in advance. For a festival like the beautiful Feast of the Valley, the high priests of Ammon at Thebes would first consult their astronomical charts and civil calendars to set the exact date, ensuring it coincided with the ideal phase of the moon and the beginning of the harvest season. A vast bureaucratic machine then whirred into action. Scribes in the temple's administrative wing, the per-ank or House of Life, would draft and dispatch orders to outlying temple estates, requisitioning the immense quantities of food, beer, wine, and incense required to feed thousands of participants and make offerings to every statue in every shrine along the processional route. They coordinated with the mayors of local villages to arrange for the temporary housing of pilgrims and with the royal granaries to ensure a surplus of bread was baked. Every detail, from the number of floral garlands needed to the allocation of river barges for transport, was calculated, logged, and tracked on hieratic ledgers. The theological and practical climax of this coordination was the procession itself. The priests had to choreograph the movement of multiple divine barks, each from a different temple, ensuring they met at specific, symbolically significant points along the route. For the Opet festival, this meant synchronizing the departures of the barks of Ammon, Mut, and Khonsu from Karnak with the arrival of the pharaoh's royal flotilla from the royal palace. Teams of priests were assigned as heralds, moving ahead of the procession to ensure the path was freshly swept and sprinkled with sacred water and natron. Temple guards and Medjay police were positioned to manage the ecstatic crowds, not to suppress them, but to safely channel their energy and prevent a catastrophic crush near the god's bark. The lead priests bearing the divine weight communicated through a complex system of almost imperceptible cues, a shift in grip on the pole, a specific footfall, to steer the massive, swaying bark through the narrow city streets without incident, their synchronized movement a testament to years of secret training. The beautiful Feast of the Valley provides a perfect window into this intricate dance. This was a festival of renewal and remembrance, where the god Ammon traveled from his home at Karnak to visit the mortuary temples on the Theban West Bank, the land of the dead. The logistics were a mirror of the journey they represented. Priests first prepared the royal and noble tombs, cleaning the chapels and ensuring the false doors were clear for the spirits to receive offerings. As the god's bark was carried to the river, a fleet of golden, papyrus-shaped divine barges, manned by teams of rowing priests, stood ready to transport it across the Nile. On the west bank, the procession wound its way through the desert valleys, stopping at each major temple. At each stop, the local priests had to be ready with their own orchestrated reception, specific hymns to be sung, the correct local offerings to be presented, and the precise ritual dialogues to be exchanged between the visiting god and the resident deity. Meanwhile, the entire population of Thebes crossed the river to picnic at the tombs of their ancestors. The priests had effectively turned the entire city into a participatory ritual. Families brought offerings to their own dead, sharing meals and news with their departed relatives, a practice made potent and real by the simultaneous physical presence of the state god moving among the mortuary temples. The priest's success in coordinating this city-wide event, managing the river traffic, the processional timing, and the public's access resulted in a powerful collective experience that reinforced social bonds, renewed the legitimacy of the king and the gods, and comforted every individual with the tangible promise of life beyond death. It was the ultimate expression of their role, not as distant mystics, but as the devoted conductors of a society's entire spiritual energy. And this brings us to the final, and in many ways most profound, of the 25 sacred practices, the meticulous and secretive transmission of esoteric knowledge. For the ancient Egyptian priest, the vast body of wisdom they guarded, from the precise pronunciation of creation spells to the medicinal properties of rare plants, was not merely information. It was a sacred trust, a direct line to the power that shaped the universe. This knowledge was far too dangerous to be written down plainly or shared freely. Its preservation required an intricate, multi-layered system of protection, blending rigorous memorization, strict hierarchical initiation, and the creation of vast, hidden libraries that functioned as the intellectual power plants of their civilization. The foundation of this system was the unwavering primacy of the oral tradition. While we have incredible written records, the most potent spells, the correct ritual intonations, and the deepest theological secrets were never entrusted to papyrus. Papyrus could rot, be stolen, or fall into the hands of the uninitiated. The human mind, trained and disciplined, was the only truly secure vault. A novice priest, or wab, would spend his first years in a state of near-silent apprenticeship, serving senior priests and absorbing the rhythms and patterns of temple life. His first real lesson was not in reading, but in listening and memorization. A lector priest would recite a text, and the novice was expected to repeat it back verbatim, capturing not just the words but the exact cadence, the pauses, and the tonal shifts. This method, known as kepa or repetition, was used to drill hundreds of hymns, spells, and astronomical calculations into the student's memory. The goal was to make the knowledge as instinctive as breathing, so that in the darkness of the sanctuary or the pressure of a healing ritual, there would be no hesitation, no mistake in a word that could alter the magic's outcome. This created a living library of priests, each one a walking, breathing repository of sacred sound, ensuring the knowledge survived even if every papyrus scroll turned to dust. As a priest progressed through the ranks from Wab to Hem-Netja, God's servant, to Hem-Neta-Tepi, first God's servant, he was gradually entrusted with deeper layers of understanding. This was a system of graduated revelation, much like peeling an onion. A junior priest might learn the standard hymn to Ra for public festivals. A middle-ranking priest would learn the extended version with its hidden symbolic meanings. Only the highest-ranking prophets would be taught the ultimate, secret name of the sun god and the terrifyingly powerful spell that could command it. This hierarchical initiation was enforced by solemn oaths sworn upon the lives of the pharaoh and the gods, vows that promised a fate worse than death for any who broke their silence. The Greek historian Herodotus, though initiated into some lower mysteries, wrote that he knew the details of certain rituals but could never speak of them, a testament to the effectiveness of this system of secrecy and fear. Yet, the oral tradition was supported by a formidable physical archive, the Per-Ankh, or House of Life. This was not a library in our modern sense of a public repository of books. It was a highly restricted temple annex, a combination of scriptorium, university, laboratory, and secure archive. Only the highest-ranking lector priests were permitted unrestricted access. Within its walls, teams of scribe priests constantly copied and recopied decaying papyri, not to distribute the knowledge but to preserve it. The walls of the Per-Ankh at Edfu Temple detail its structure. It contained rooms for the study of theology to know all that is hidden, chambers for anatomy and medicine to drive away the diseases of the body, halls for astronomy and calendar calculation to know the secret of the motion of the stars, and even a laboratory for the preparation of temple incense, perfumes, pigments according to secret recipes. The texts housed within were protected by a form of early cryptography. While not ciphers in the modern sense, the priests used layers of obfuscation to safeguard their contents. Knowledge was written in a highly arcane and symbolic language, filled with puns, allegories, and coded metaphors that were meaningless to an outsider. A medical text might describe a surgical procedure using the metaphor of a battle between Horus and Seth. A spell to invoke a god might be disguised as a simple love poem to the untrained eye. Furthermore, the act of writing itself was considered magical. Dangerous spells were often written in a defective script, with certain determinatives or signs omitted to defang the text, rendering it inert until a properly trained priest, who knew the correct and complete version by heart, could speak it aloud and activate its power. The ultimate purpose of this entire vast, secretive system was balance. The priests believed that this knowledge was the very toolkit the gods used to create and maintain the universe. In the wrong hands, it could be used to unravel creation itself, by guarding it so fiercely, by ensuring it passed only to those who had proven their purity, discipline, and understanding. The priests of ancient Egypt shouldered their greatest responsibility, acting as the loyal stewards of cosmic order, protecting the world from chaos by safeguarding the very words that held it together. From the daily rites of purification to the grand spectacle of festival processions, the 25 sacred practices we've explored reveal a civilization whose spiritual life was breathtakingly rich, complex, and sophisticated. The ancient Egyptian priests were far more than religious functionaries. They were scientists, healers, astronomers, administrators, and master ritualists who saw their entire world as a living, breathing expression of the divine. Their duty was to maintain the delicate balance of mad cosmic order against the ever-present threat of chaos, and they did so with a precision and devotion that allowed their civilization to flourish for an almost unimaginable 3,000 years. Every action, from the precise measurement of a temple's foundation to the rhythmic shaking of a sacred rattle, was a vital thread in a vast, intricate tapestry designed to keep the universe in harmony. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that the sacred and the scientific were once inseparable paths to understanding the world. The priest astronomer tracking the star Sirius to predict the Nile's flood was performing both a spiritual and a practical service for his entire society. The priest physician blending a honey poultice while reciting an incantation to Isis was engaging in a holistic form of healing that modern medicine is only now beginning to appreciate. This fusion of empirical observation and profound faith, of meticulous record-keeping and powerful magic, is perhaps their greatest gift to us. It challenges our modern distinctions and invites us to see the world as they did, a place of wonder, connection, and deep, abiding mystery. Now we want to hear from you. After this journey into the heart of ancient Egyptian spirituality, which of these 25 practices resonated with you the most? Was it the mesmerizing power of the opening of the mouth ceremony, the advanced medical knowledge found in the Ebers papyrus, or the incredible engineering behind the Serapeum's massive sarcophagi? Share your thoughts and the practice that fascinated you the most in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you enjoyed unraveling these mysteries with us, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the hidden corners of history. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep